All right, y'all. I got my phone on the charger, so this video is sideways. I'm saying this is where we're at on this page, right down here. All right. It says, and I'm going to start from the previous sentence, the last sentence in the last paragraph. Okay? Otherwise, he might be forced indeed by a superior power to act after a certain manner, but he could not be properly obliged. Such is the true foundation of sovereignty and independence, a foundation that might be still better established by applying these general principles to the particular species of known sovereignty or empire, such as that of God over man, that of a prince over his subjects, and the power fathers have over their children. We should be convinced thereby that all these species of authority are generally found on the principles above established, which would serve for a new proof of the truth of those principles. But 'tis sufficient to have hinted here in general at this remark. The particulars we reserve for another place. An authority established on such a foundation, and which comprises whatever can be imagined most efficacious and capable to bind man, and to incline him to be steadily directed by certain rules of conduct, undoubtedly forms the completest and strongest obligation, for there is no obligation more perfect than that which is produced by the strongest motives to determine the will, and the most capable by their preponderancy to prevail over all other contrary reasons. Now everything concurs here to this effect. The nature of the rules prescribed by the sovereign, which of themselves are the fittest to promote our perfection and felicity, the power and authority which he is invested, whereby he is enabled to describe our happiness or misery, and in fine, the entire confidence we have in him because of his power, wisdom, and goodness. What can we imagine more to captivate the will, to gain the heart, to oblige man, and to produce within him the highest degree of moral necessity, which constitutes the most perfect obligation? I say moral necessity, for we are not to destroy the nature of man. He remains always what he is, a free and intelligent being, and as such, the sovereign undertakes to direct him by his laws. Wherefore, even the strictest obligations never force the will, but rigorously speaking, man is always at liberty to comply or not, though, as we commonly say, at his risk and peril. But if he consults reason and is willing to follow its dictates, he will take particular care to avoid exercising this metaphysical power in opposition to the views of his sovereign, an opposition that must terminate in his own misery and ruin. Rigorously. I don't know why I have trouble with that one. We have already observed that there are two sorts of obligations. The one internal, which is the work of reason only, and founded on the good or evil we perceive in the very nature of things. The other external, which is produced by the will of him who we acknowledge our superior and master. Now the obligation produced by law unites these two sorts of ties, which by their concurrence strengthen each other, and thus from the completest obligation that can possibly be imagined, It is possibly for this reason that most civilians acknowledge no other obligation properly so called but that which is the effect of law and imposed by a superior. This is true if we mean only external obligation, that which is the strictest and strongest tie of man. But it must not be inferred from thence that we ought to admit not no other sort of obligation. The principles we establish when inquiring into the Jesus Christ, the first origin and the nature of obligation generally considered, and the particular remarks we have just now made on the obligation arising from law are sufficient, if I am not mistaken, to evince that there is a primitive, original, and internal obligation which is inseparable from reason, and not necessarily to concur with the external obligation in order to communicate to the latter all the necessary force to determine and bend the will, and to influence effectively the human heart. By distinguishing rightly these ideas, we shall find perhaps that this is one way of reconciling opinions which seem to be wide from each other, and only because they are misunderstood. Sure, it is at least the manner in which we have explained the foundation of sovereignty and independence coincides in the main with Puffendorf's system, as will easily appear by comparing it with what this author says, whether in his large work or in his abridgment. And that's the end of that chapter.